Alex Turner had always been the kind of person who noticed things that others missed, the student sitting alone at lunch, the classmate who never raised their hand despite knowing the answers, the small moments of exclusion that most people either ignored or participated in without thinking. So when the first-century student in Terran Unity Academy's history hesitated at the doorway of advanced interspecies relations, clutching her books like armor against an uncertain reception, Alex immediately understood the dynamics playing out in the bright classroom. "Settling in, everyone," Professor Martinez called from the front of the room, apparently oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the space. "We have a lot to cover this semester, and I want to make sure we get off to a strong start." The alien woman, Alex had read her name was Zara Velani in the enrollment announcements, stood frozen in the doorway, her soft gray skin almost luminous under the classroom's natural lighting. Her long wavy purple hair caught the morning sun streaming through the tall windows, and her posture suggested someone steeling themselves for a challenge they weren't sure they could face. Alex watched as Zara's golden eyes swept across the classroom, searching for an empty seat. The wooden desks were arranged in long rows, most filled with chattering students who were either catching up on gossip from the break or making last-minute comparisons of assignment notes. But as Zara moved into the room, conversations died into uncomfortable silence. It wasn't dramatic or overtly hostile, no one shouted slurs or made threatening gestures. It was worse than that. It was the polite, civilized form of exclusion that left no room for complaint but made its message perfectly clear: you're not wanted here. Students shifted their bags to occupy empty seats beside them. Others suddenly discovered urgent need to spread out their materials across the desk space that might accommodate a partner. A few simply avoided eye contact entirely, staring at their tablets or notebooks as if Zara were invisible. Alex felt something twist in his stomach as he watched this careful choreography of rejection. He'd heard the discussions, of course, the political tensions between human territories and Zenthari space that had dominated news cycles for months, the concerns about telepathic species in academic settings, the whispered theories about alien infiltration and cultural contamination. But watching those abstract prejudices play out in real time, seeing their effect on an individual who was simply trying to attend class, made Alex's chest tight with the anger he was still learning to name. Zara had made it halfway down the first row, her steps growing slower as each potential seat proved unavailable. Alex could see the careful control in her posture, the way she held her shoulders straight despite what had to be crushing disappointment and embarrassment. Without stopping to think about consequences or social implications, Alex simply slid his chair to the right, creating obvious space beside him, and tapped the empty desktop with his pen. The sound was soft, but in the silence that had fallen over the classroom, it carried like a bell. Every head turned toward Alex, some expression surprised, others calculating, a few openly disapproving. Zara paused, her golden eyes meeting Alex's for the first time. He saw surprise there, and caution, and something that might have been hope carefully controlled by experience that suggested hope was often disappointed. Alex smiled and gestured toward the empty space beside him, trying to convey without words that the invitation was genuine and unconditional. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Zara stood perfectly still, as if testing whether this unexpected kindness might be some elaborate setup for humiliation. Then, slowly, she moved toward Alex's desk. "Thank you," she said quietly as she settled into the chair beside him, her voice carrying the musical undertones that characterized Zenthari speech. "Alex Turner," he replied just as quietly, offering his hand in the universal gesture of greeting. "Zara Velani," she responded, accepting the handshake with fingers that were surprisingly warm despite her alien appearance. "First day?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. "First day," Zara confirmed, and Alex caught the relief in her voice as her shoulders finally began to relax. "First, many things, actually." "Yeah, I imagine it would be," Alex said, pulling out his tablet and pretending not to notice the whispered conversations that were starting up around them. "Well, Professor Martinez is actually pretty good, so at least the class should be interesting." Zara's smile was small but genuine, and Alex felt something settle in his chest like satisfaction at a job well done. Around them, the classroom gradually returned to its normal pre-class energy, though Alex could feel the attention that was still focused on their unlikely pairing. "Mr. Turner," Professor Martinez called from the front of the room, "since you seem to have taken initiative in our seating arrangements, perhaps you'd be willing to introduce our new student to the class." Alex felt heat rise in his cheeks, but when he glanced at Zara, she nodded with what looked like appreciation rather than annoyance. "Everyone, this is Zara Velani," Alex said, standing and addressing the room with more confidence than he felt. "She's joining us from the Zenthari Academic Exchange Program, and since Professor Martinez always tells us that interspecies relations work best when they're actually interspecies, I figured we should probably start with basic courtesy." A few students chuckled at that, and Alex saw some of the tension leave Zara's posture. "Thank you, Mr. Turner," Professor Martinez said with obvious approval. "Ms. Velani, welcome to Advanced Interspecies Relations. I think you'll find this class provides excellent preparation for the kind of diplomatic work that will be essential for our future." As the professor launched into the day's lecture, Alex settled back into his chair, acutely aware of Zara beside him taking careful notes and occasionally glancing his way with expressions that suggested grateful surprise. Alex had no way of knowing that his simple gesture, sliding his chair over and tapping the desk, would become the foundation for the most important friendship of his academic career, and eventually something much deeper than friendship. All he knew was that doing the right thing had felt natural, necessary, and surprisingly easy. The hard part, he was beginning to suspect, would be everything that came after. The partnership that began with Alex's simple gesture of making space evolved over the following weeks into something neither of them had expected. What started as study collaboration, comparing notes, discussing lecture topics, working through complex diplomatic scenarios, gradually revealed itself to be genuine friendship based on shared curiosity, complementary perspectives, and mutual respect that transcended species boundaries. "You know," Zara said during one of their regular study sessions in the library's quieter section, "your understanding of Centaurian trade protocols is remarkably sophisticated for someone who's never actually met a Centaurian." Alex looked up from his tablet, where he'd been reviewing cultural sensitivity guidelines. "Is that your polite way of saying I'm overthinking it?" "It's my way of saying that you approach interspecies relations like someone who actually cares about getting it right rather than just passing the exam," Zara replied with a smile that had become increasingly frequent over their weeks of partnership. "Well, it helps having a study partner who can provide insider perspective on what it's actually like to be the alien in the room," Alex said, immediately wondering if his casual use of the word alien might be offensive. Zara's laugh was bright and genuine. "Alex, you realize that from my perspective, you're the alien, right? Gray skin and purple hair are perfectly normal where I come from. It's the whole only one head and no telepathic abilities thing that makes you exotic." "One head is very efficient," Alex protested with mock seriousness. "And I like to think my lack of telepathic abilities gives me a certain mysterious quality." "Oh, absolutely mysterious," Zara agreed, her golden eyes bright with amusement. "Sometimes I have no idea what you're thinking, which is refreshing after a lifetime of involuntary access to other people's surface thoughts." Alex paused his tablet scrolling to look at Zara more carefully. "Is that why you seemed so nervous that first day? Because you're used to being able to sense what people are thinking about you?" Zara's expression grew more serious, and Alex caught a glimpse of the vulnerability she usually kept carefully controlled. "Partly. Zenthari telepathy isn't mind reading exactly, more like emotional broadcasting and surface thought reception. I could feel the discomfort from across the room that day. The suspicion, the resentment, the fear." "I'm sorry," Alex said quietly. "That must have been overwhelming." "It was," Zara admitted. "But then you made space for me without any of that emotional static. Just kindness, I suppose. Clean and simple and genuine. It was the first time since arriving on Earth that I felt like someone saw me as a person rather than a political symbol or a security concern." Alex felt something warm settle in his chest at her words, but before he could respond, their conversation was interrupted by voices from the main library area that carried more clearly than the speakers probably intended. "Turner's gone completely native," someone was saying. "Spends all his time with that Zen girl, probably thinks he's going to be some kind of interspecies relations hero. It's weird, right? Another voice replied. Like, I get being polite, but he's actually friends with her. What's next? Are we supposed to pretend they're just like us? Alex felt his jaw clench, but before he could stand up to confront the speakers, Zara's hand touched his arm. Don't, she said softly. It will only make things more difficult for both of us. They don't get to talk about you like that, Alex said, though he remained seated at her request. They get to think whatever they want, Zara replied with resignation that suggested long experience with such attitudes. And unfortunately, they get to say whatever they want as long as they're not saying it directly to me. Alex studied Zara's face, noting the careful control that kept her expression neutral despite what had to be hurt feelings. Does it bother you? The things people say? Of course it bothers me, Zara said honestly. But Alex, I knew what I was signing up for when I applied for the exchange program. I'm not here to make everyone comfortable with my presence. I'm here to learn, to build bridges, and to prove that cooperation between our species is possible. And to make at least one genuine human friend. Zara's smile was radiant despite the circumstances. That was an unexpected bonus. Though I should probably warn you that continuing to associate with me might complicate your social life here. Alex looked around the library, noting several students who quickly averted their gazes when they realized he was watching them. You know what? I think my social life could use some complicating. Alex. Zara, I'm not being your friend because I'm trying to prove some political point or because I want to seem enlightened about interspecies relations, Alex said with quiet conviction. I'm being your friend because you're funny, intelligent, patient with my terrible pronunciation of Zenthri cultural terms, and because you actually listen when people talk instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. Those are all very practical reasons for friendship, Zara observed. Plus, Alex added with a grin, you're the only person I know who can explain quantum consciousness theory in ways that actually make sense, and you laugh at my jokes even when they're not very good. Zara's laugh was bright enough to draw annoyed looks from students who preferred their library time to be strictly silent. Your jokes are terrible, Alex. That's what makes them funny. See? Perfect friendship material. As they returned to their studying, Alex found himself thinking about the conversations he'd been having with family and friends back home, the careful questions about his alien friend, and the suggestions that he might want to be cautious about getting too involved in interspecies politics. But looking at Zara, watching her work through complex diplomatic scenarios with insight that came from lived experience rather than textbook theory, Alex realized that the friendship they'd built was the most meaningful relationship he'd formed since starting at the academy. Alex? Zara said without looking up from her tablet. Yeah. Thank you. For that first day, and for continuing to choose kindness even when it's not convenient. Alex felt something shift in his understanding of their friendship, moving from casual alliance towards something deeper and more significant. Zara, he said seriously, choosing kindness toward you has been the easiest choice I've made since getting here. Everything else about this place is complicated, but being your friend is the simplest thing in the world. Zara's smile was soft and genuine, and Alex thought he saw something in her golden eyes that suggested their friendship might be evolving into something neither of them had expected but both were beginning to hope for. In that case, Zara said with renewed energy, want to tackle the Rigelian cultural sensitivity protocols? Because I have some thoughts about their approach to personal space that might interest you. Lead the way, Alex said, settling back into his chair with the comfortable satisfaction of someone who had found exactly where he belonged. Outside the library windows, the campus continued its daily rhythms, but inside their quiet corner, Alex and Zara continued building something that would prove more durable than political tensions and more powerful than prejudice, understanding that began with simple kindness and grew into something that could change the world. The incident occurred on a Thursday afternoon in late October, when autumn light slanted through the academy's tall windows and the semester had settled into comfortable routines that made everyone feel like the social dynamics were established and unlikely to change. Alex was waiting for Zara outside the comparative government building when he heard voices that made his blood run cold. Come on, Zen, someone was saying with false friendliness that carried clear undertones of threat. We just want to chat. Find out what it's really like having access to people's thoughts all the time. Alex rounded the corner to find Zara backed against the building's stone wall, her books clutched against her chest, facing 3 students from their international law class. Brad Kellerman, who'd made no secret of his opinion that alien students were taking spots from qualified humans, stood closest to Zara with his arms crossed and an expression that suggested he was enjoying her obvious discomfort. I don't access anyone's thoughts without permission, Zara said carefully, her voice steady despite the situation. Zen-3 telepathy doesn't work that way. Right, Brad said with a laugh that held no humor. That's what you want us to believe. But how would we know if you were lying? How would we know if you've been reading our minds this whole time, reporting back to your government about human weaknesses? Because I'm a student, not a spy, Zara replied, though Alex could see the tension in her shoulders that suggested she was calculating whether she could get past them safely. Are you, though? Another student, Sarah Chen, asked with the kind of fake concern that was designed to sound reasonable to any adults who might overhear. I mean, it's pretty convenient that the first Zen-3 exchange student just happened to enroll in advanced interspecies relations. Almost like someone planned it that way. Alex felt anger building in his chest as he realized what was happening. This wasn't casual prejudice or thoughtless exclusion, it was deliberate intimidation designed to make Zara feel unsafe and unwelcome. Hey, Alex called out, stepping into the confrontation with more confidence than he felt. Everything okay here? The 3 students turned toward him, and Alex saw Brad's expression shift to something that might have been disappointment mixed with calculation. Just having a friendly conversation with our alien classmate, Brad said with exaggerated innocence. Getting to know her better. You know how important cultural exchange is. Looks more like harassment to me, Alex said, moving to stand beside Zara. Which is probably against about 12 different academy policies. Nobody's harassing anyone, Turner, Sarah said with the tone of someone who'd practiced sounding reasonable while doing unreasonable things. We were just asking questions about Zen-3 culture. Isn't that what she's here for? Alex looked at Zara, noting the careful control in her expression and the way she was holding herself perfectly still. Zara? Do you want to continue this conversation? No, Zara said quietly but clearly. I would like to leave now. Well, there's your answer, Alex said, offering Zara his arm. Cultural exchange concluded for the day. Careful, Turner, Brad said as Alex and Zara moved away from the wall. People are starting to talk about how much time you spend with your alien friend. Wondering if maybe you're getting a little too interested in interspecies cooperation, if you know what I mean. Alex felt something crystallize in his chest, not fear, but absolute clarity about what kind of person he wanted to be in this moment. You know what, Brad? Alex said, turning back to face the group. You're right. I am very interested in interspecies cooperation. I think it's the future of galactic civilization, and I think people who try to intimidate and harass exchange students are exactly the kind of narrow-minded bigots who are going to be left behind by history. Alex, Zara said softly, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Alex interrupted, though his tone toward her was gentle. Because this isn't about political correctness or diplomatic courtesy. This is about basic human decency, and anyone who can't manage that doesn't deserve to be studying interspecies relations. The confrontation might have escalated, but Professor Martinez appeared around the corner at precisely the right moment, took one look at the situation, and immediately shifted into the mode of authority that had made him one of the Academy's most respected faculty members. Is there a problem here? He asked in the tone of someone who was prepared to make any problem become much larger and more official if necessary. No problem, Professor, Brad said quickly. Just discussing class material. Excellent, Professor Martinez replied dryly. Then I'm sure you won't mind continuing that discussion in my office, where I can properly assess your understanding of the material. All 3 of you. Now. As Brad, Sarah, and their companion reluctantly followed Professor Martinez toward the building, Alex turned to check on Zara. Are you okay? Zara's smile was shaky but genuine. I am now. Thank you for standing up for me. You didn't have to do that. Of course I did, Alex said with quiet conviction. They were being awful to you, and that's not acceptable. But Alex, you realize that defending me publicly is going to make things more difficult for you here. People were already talking, and now. Alex considered this for a moment, thinking about the social dynamics he'd observed over the past months, the careful distance most students maintain from anything that might be considered controversial. Zara, he said finally, do you remember what you told me about why you applied for the exchange program? About wanting to build bridges and prove that cooperation was possible? Yes. Well, I think maybe that's a two-way street. Maybe humans need to prove we're worth cooperating with too. And maybe that starts with individuals choosing to do the right thing even when it's not convenient. Zara's expression grew warm with something that looked like affection mixed with gratitude. Alex Turner, you are either the most idealistic person I've ever met, or the bravest. Can't I be both? Zara's laugh was bright and genuine, carrying no trace of the tension from their confrontation. I think you already are both. As they walked toward the library for their regular study session, Alex found himself thinking about the choice he'd just made, not the dramatic confrontation with Brad and his friends, but the smaller, ongoing choice to continue being Zara's friend despite social pressure and political complications. It wasn't a choice he'd planned to make when he first moved his chair over to make space for her. But it was a choice he was glad to have made, and one he would continue making every day for as long as Zara needed a friend who saw her as a person rather than a political symbol. Alex? Zara said as they settled into their usual library corner. Yeah. For what it's worth, I think defending your friends is one of the most human traits I've observed since coming here. And one of the best. Alex felt something warm settle in his chest as he realized that Zara's friendship had become precious to him in ways that went far beyond academic partnership or social idealism. For what it's worth, he replied, having a friend worth defending has taught me things about courage I never would have learned otherwise. Zara's smile was radiant, and Alex thought that maybe building bridges between worlds was exactly as simple and as complicated as choosing kindness, one person at a time. Spring semester brought changes that no one could have predicted when Zara first hesitated at the classroom doorway 8 months earlier. The academy had implemented new diversity and inclusion initiatives, several more exchange students had enrolled from various species, and the social dynamics that had seemed so rigid during those first difficult weeks had evolved into something far more hopeful. Alex watched from across the student union as Zara sat at a table surrounded by classmates, human and alien alike, working on what appeared to be a collaborative project for advanced diplomatic protocol. Her purple hair caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and her laugh carried across the space with the musical quality that had become as familiar to Alex as his own voice. She's really something, isn't she? Alex turned to find Professor Martinez beside him, following his gaze toward Zara's animated conversation with their study group. She's incredible, Alex agreed without thinking, then immediately felt heat rise in his cheeks at how much his tone had revealed. Professor Martinez's smile was knowing but kind. Mr. Turner, I hope you understand that what you did that first day, making space for Ms. Vellani when no one else would, that was the beginning of everything good that's happened since. I just moved my chair over, Alex protested. It wasn't some grand gesture. Sometimes the most important gestures are the smallest ones, Professor Martinez observed. You chose inclusion when exclusion would have been easier. You chose courage when comfort would have been safer. And you've continued making those choices every day since. Alex considered this as he watched Zara explain something to a human student who was taking careful notes, her expression patient and encouraging in ways that had helped Alex himself understand complex concepts countless times. Professor, Alex said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course. That first day, when you asked me to introduce Zara to the class, did you plan that? Professor Martinez's smile was mischievous. Mr. Turner, as an educator, I've learned to recognize students who have the potential to be bridges between different groups. I also learned to create opportunities for that potential to be realized. So you knew I would make space for her. I hoped you would, Professor Martinez corrected. But the choice was entirely yours. And every choice you've made since then has been entirely yours as well. As if sensing his attention, Zara looked up from her study group and smiled directly at Alex, a smile that held warmth and affection and something deeper that made his heart race. Professor, Alex said quietly, I think I need to tell her something. I think she's been hoping you would, Professor Martinez replied with the tone of someone who'd been observing developing relationships for decades. Good luck, Mr. Turner. Alex made his way across the student union, noting how naturally the diverse group of students made room for him at their table, how the conversation flowed in multiple languages with automatic translation and patient explanation, how normal this integration had become. Alex. Zara said with genuine pleasure. Perfect timing. We're trying to work out the protocol requirements for a 3-species trade negotiation, and Maya thinks we should prioritize Centaurian customs while I think Rigelian temporal considerations should take precedence. Definitely Rigelian temporal considerations, Alex said, settling into the chair beside Zara that she'd kept open for him. I'm saying that what started as friendship has become something deeper for me, Alex said, reaching out to take her hand. I'm saying that you're not just my favorite study partner or my favorite alien friend, you're my favorite person, period. Even though I'm telepathic and purple-haired and from a completely different species. Especially, the simple act of moving over without a word had become the foundation for something that would influence interspecies relations for generations to come. And it had all started with one person choosing to see another person's need and responding with simple, wordless generosity. Some revolutions, Alex had learned, began with nothing more dramatic than making room.